Who says active symbols are computational entities? It is the vast collection of ants, read neural firings if you prefer, that add up to something genuinely symbolic. And who can say whether there exist rules, formal computational rules at the level of teams themselves, read concepts, ideas, thoughts, that are of full predictive power in describing how they will flow. I am speaking of rules that allow you to ignore what is going on down below, yet that still yield perfect, or at least very accurate, predictions on the team's behaviour. To be sure, there are phenomenological observations that can be formalised to sound like rules that will describe, very vaguely, how those highest level teams act. But what guarantee is there that we can skim off the full fluidity of the top level activity of a brain and encapsulate it without any lower substrate, in the form of some computational rules? To ask an analogous question, what guarantee is there that there are rules at the cloud level, more properly speaking, the level of cold fronts, isobars, trade winds, and so on, that will allow you to say accurately how the atmosphere is going to behave on a large scale? Perhaps there are no such rules. Perhaps weather prediction is an intrinsically intractable problem. Perhaps the behaviour of clouds is not expressible in terms that are computational at their own level, even if the behaviour of the microscopic substrate, the molecules, is computational. The premise of AI is that thoughts themselves are computational entities at their own level. At least this is the premise of the information processing school of AI, and I have very serious doubts about it. The difference between my active symbols, teams, and the passive symbols, ants or tokens, of the information processing school of AI is that the active symbols flow and act on their own. In other words, there is no higher level agent, reading program, that reaches down and shoves them around. Active symbols must incorporate within their own structures the wherewithal to trigger and cause actions. They cannot just be passive storehouses, bins, receptacles of data. Yet to Newell and Simon it seems even so tiny a thing as a bit is a symbol. This is brought out repeatedly in their writings on physical symbol systems. A good term for the little units that a computer manipulates, as well as for neural firings, is tokens. All computers are good at token manipulation. However, only some, the appropriately programmed ones, could support active symbols. I prefer not to say that they would carry out symbol manipulation, since that gets back to the image of a central program shoving around some passive representation of structures. The point is, in such a hypothetical program, and none exists as of yet, the symbols themselves are acting. A simple analogy from ordinary programming might help to convey the level distinction that I'm trying to make here. When a computer is running a Lisp program, does it do function calling? To say yes would be unconventional. The conventional view is that functions call other functions, and the computer is simply the hardware that supports function calling activity. In somewhat the same sense, although with much more parallelism, symbols activate or trigger or awaken other symbols in a brain. The brain itself does not manipulate symbols. The brain is the medium in which the symbols are floating and in which they trigger each other. There is no central manipulator, no central program. There is simply a vast collection of teams, patterns of neural firings that, like teams of ants, trigger other patterns of neural firings. The symbols are not down there at the level of the individual firings. They are up here, where we do our verbalization. We feel those symbols churning within ourselves in somewhat the same way as we feel our stomach churning. We do not do symbol manipulation by some sort of act of will, let alone some set of logical rules of deduction. We cannot decide what we will think next, nor how our thoughts will progress. Not only are we not symbol manipulators, in fact, quite to the contrary, we are manipulated by our symbols. As Kim Scott once cleverly remarked, rather than speak of free will, perhaps it is more appropriate to speak of free won't. This way of looking at things turns everything on its head, placing cognition, that rational seeming level of our minds, where it belongs, namely as a consequence of much deeper processes of myriads of interacting subcognitive structures. The rationale has had entirely too much made of it in AI research. It is time for some of the irrational and subcognitive to be recognised for its pivotal role.